All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first online lecture. So this is all about environmental language facilitation techniques. So what does that mean? Let's define what that means. When we talk about environmental language techniques, these are techniques that will help children improve their ability to use language. That isn't a formal sit-down lesson. These are things you can do in your everyday when you interact with children to improve their language skills. So these are our goals for today. We want to focus on how we're going to change our environment, talk about routines, and talk about behaviors that you can do as an adult to improve that. And then you'll see on Canvas, you have your assignment to use one of these techniques with a student that you work with. And then you're going to write about it. So let's get into it, shall we? So, types of naturalistic language facilitation techniques. And that's just, again, what we talked about. These are things that you can do in your everyday life, in your everyday routines. It's not a lesson that you formally sit down and teach a kid. It's just how you interact with them. And we're going to break this down into kind of three categories. First are things that you do as an adult. Second are the routines that you set up as a classroom. And then the third thing are how you as an adult arrange your classroom and your materials. And the great thing about these techniques that I'm going to teach you about today is that they are great for all sorts of different kids in all sorts of different language difficulties. They work really well with any young child that you have in your life that's learning how to talk. So even if they don't have a disability, they're developing right on time. Using these with like a really young baby will help them grow and improve their ability to communicate with you. They're really great with people who are non-speaking, who don't talk to you. And they're wonderful, so important to use with people who use AAC and other devices to communicate with you. They're good for kids who have trouble understanding language. Remember that word receptive language from our last lesson. That for kids who maybe can't follow directions, who don't understand everything, these techniques will really help improve their ability to learn what words mean. And then they're also great for that expressive language. And if you remember from last week, that's your ability to produce sentences, to say grammar, to use different vocabulary words. All those things are so important. So let's get into it. So the first thing, and kind of to me, the most important thing, are your adult behaviors. So when we talk about adult behaviors, these are things that you as an adult do when you're talking with kids every day. So the first and honestly most difficult thing is pausing. And that is just waiting before you say something or you try to get a child to respond to you. Full confession, when I was in graduate school, you get rated for how you interact with a kid. So someone will watch you work with a kid and they'll have this clipboard and they'll write all these notes about what you're doing right and wrong. And this was always a big thing on my clipboard is, Crystal, you're doing great, but you do not give enough wait time. You don't pause and give that kid a child to, or you don't give that kid a chance to respond to you. So it's something that doesn't come naturally to me, but I've learned how to do over the years, and I know you guys can too. And that is, so when I say pausing, it can kind of look like a lot of different things. Sometimes it's not saying anything when you go up to a kid and just observing them and watching how they play. And then when you see something that they're interested in, that can be a good time to try to communicate with them. Sometimes it's asking them a question and waiting and counting in your head for them to respond to you. So for example, in your classroom, let's say you're doing a reading lesson, you could have your book open, you could say, okay, what color is the book? And it'll feel painful because it's not something we do when we talk with other adults. We don't have a 10-second pause. It would be weird, but for our students who are learning language for the first time, pausing gives them a chance to process what you're saying and to respond to you. And this is especially important for people who use AAC devices. because using an AAC device is a lot slower than talking with your mouth. So they need that extra wait time to get their thought out before you kind of go on ahead. And it's important to also remember that different children need different amount of wait time. When I work with my students who are physically disabled and use AAC, moving their body is so hard for them. So I've had students that I wrote in their IEP that they need 30 seconds of wait time, a minute of wait time before I want them to respond to me. Some of our students have no attention span. They couldn't wait 30 seconds. That 30 seconds is an eternity to them, and they need less. But as kind of a good rule of thumb, it's nice to start by counting to 10 before you wait for a respond or say anything to the kids. And then see if that's good or bad, and then you can add on time or take away time as you see fit. You guys see me do this a lot. This is gesturing. So that's stuff like waving, pointing, clapping, and this more iconic sign. So what do we mean when we say iconic sign? So these are kind of gestures that look a lot like the thing you're doing. So a great example is this sign you're seeing this girl in the corner doing, drinking. This kind of looks like this action of drinking. And it's physically moving your whole body is a really great thing for communicating. You guys actually probably saw me do that during our very first lesson of the year. Because I work with young children every day, and you guys do too, I've learned how to just kind of incorporate this. So when I'm pretending to crawl on the floor and do that stuff, some of those things can be really helpful for your kids too. A really great example of this, I saw a teacher who was fabulous. They had a lesson all about prepositions. So those are words like on and off and under and over. And they set up an obstacle course. So they read this book all about a troll, going over a bridge and looking for something. And then they took a bunch of things. They took like a little ramp, and they took like a little tunnel that the kids went through, and they had like a little limbo thing. And then they did all of those actions with the book, and having those actions, that physical movement, was really helpful for those kids to learn. Music is also a wonderful way to teach gestures. You guys talked to me a lot about this on our very first class of the year, where you talked about how you knew so many young children who learned songs and remembered songs and got that before they got the word or learned a word from a song. And that's so important. Doing all of those songs that use little gestures like the Itsy Bitsy Spider and my favorite, One Little Finger. Those are great ways to help kids learn how to use gestures and learn how to imitate and copy people, which is a really important skill for our youngest language learners. So all of that gesturing is a huge helpful thing when you're working with people who are learning language for the first time. Another really important thing is repeating the same word over and over again. As adults, it's really important. We learn by repeating things over and over again. Every person, it's kind of one of the most powerful tools we have as educators, is what we say over and over again. It's what we know from brain science. The more things that you do repetitively, the better you'll get at them. And it's no different from learning a word. It can be really helpful to pick one word and then focus on teaching that one word through the day or the week. It's also really nice. We found that repeating a story to children with similar words in it can also really improve their ability to remember those words you're trying to teach them. So when you're reading Pete the Cat over and over again and you can't take it anymore, know that it is for a good reason, and that repeated story really is associated with more understanding of those words in that story. And there's some great research that you can remember a newly learned word when you kind of follow this order that I have listed. So first you learn the word, then you have the kids repeat the word with a couple other words out loud. So let's say I wanted to teach the word car. We would learn the word, we'd do a fun activity where we did our gestures and something like that. So we'd have the kids learn all about car. Then we'd repeat that word with 2 other words. So car, pen, I'm running out of hands, cup. And then we would have them, once we're all done with our lesson, we would have them recall that word, remember that word, and study all 3 words together, going back and forth on which one you pulled up. So let's say, did our lesson, we repeated it with the other words, and then we would quiz the kids and we'd say, okay, which one is this? A cup, great job. Which one is this? A pen, good job. And which one is this? It's a car, good job. So all those things are great ways to help just get those words in their head and repeat it over and over again. This is a great thing to do. This is a grammatical recast. So this is when you repeat what a kid says to you with more adult grammar. So for example, I had a student who, oh my gosh, everything he said, he could not get that I in the right place. So he would say, me likey, me eat pizza, me want, all the time. And I really wanted him to get that more adult version of I like pizza. I like cars. So I worked with his teachers to help have them, every time he said something like that, we would reinforce it with, he would say like, ooh, me like pizza. I like pizza. And that is a really great way to help teach those more complicated grammar forms. So this is a little bit more for kids who you want to have them express language, but it works for everything a kid does. But it works for all sorts of grammar is what I should say. So it's a really good technique for that. So this next one can be a little bit difficult to understand. So when you are just having a conversation with a kid, especially one of our early language learners, you want to make sure that you have more statements than questions, which is not very natural to us as adults, because when I want an adult to talk to me more, I ask them lots of questions. It's why I gave you all of those questions on our slide that very first day of class. But for kids, questions are they create a demand and they can make communicating more difficult for you actually, which is a little bit counterintuitive to what we do as adults. When we use more statements, they tend to have easier grammar. Little kids, when they go through language development, they tend to learn statements first, and then they learn how to ask questions later. So when you ask them a question, you're kind of using harder grammar than if you use a statement. And also, we want to use more statements because it gives kids more room to share their ideas. And kind of the rule of thumb that we have and that research has kind of told us is that you want to ask or use 3 statements to every 1 question. So what does that look like? So let's say I'm with a little kid and I'm playing with a car and I see them playing. I'm going to use my pause and I'm wait to see what they're interested in. Oh, vroom, you're driving it over the cup. That's 1 statement. Ooh, I see your black car. 2 statements. The wheel's spinning. 3 statements. Where should we put your car next? There's our question. And if you do ask, and when you do ask your 1 question, you want to make it more open-ended. So what do I mean by an open-ended question? An open-ended question has many different responses, as opposed to a closed-ended question, which there's kind of only 1 right answer to it, right? So where do you want to put your car next? That's open-ended. The kid could say anything. On your head, Missy. On the table. But if I were to say, What color is this car? There's only one right answer. It's black. Same thing with a yes/no question. There is a time and a place for a yes/no question, but you don't get a lot of language from asking somebody a yes/no question. So all of those things is you want to have 3 statements for every one question, and then you want your one question to be more open-ended. So, I've worked with some teachers who are fabulous at this, and that is giving students choices throughout the day. So the best teachers that I've worked with find ways to have students make a choice and choose from materials no matter what they're doing. If you're doing a writing activity, you could say, do you want a pen or a pencil? For our non-speaking students, you can hold both items up and wait for them to either look at the one that they want or grab the one they want. And then you can pair that with a word on their device, or you can pair that with the spoken word. Oh, you grabbed the pencil. Good job. So you can use that for making choices throughout the day. The preschool classroom that I work with now, I've never seen someone do this as well as they do. No matter what activity it is, there is a choice involved. What toy do you want? What food do you want for lunch? They made carved pumpkins and they had them choose what shape they wanted to carve in the pumpkin. Every little thing. What color paint do you want for our craft project today? All of those things are so, so important, and they really, really help students get autonomy. They kind of get more engaged with the activity that you're doing, and it helps them learn those words because they're actively choosing things, and they get a consequence for that. So if you want to teach colors, letting them pick which color they want, they'll remember that because it's an activity and it's meaningful and it changes what they're doing. So not only can you do it for these activities that you do, for those of you working with older students who may have language problems, you can do this when you are quizzing them or trying to get some academic content down. So if you're asking, let's say you're doing an activity about science, you're like, okay, what chemical are we talking about? Are we talking about... Wow, you can tell it's been a while since I've taken chemistry. Maybe we'll do something easier for poor Miss C. Let's say we're doing math. We're saying, okay, students, what shape is this on the car? You're getting nothing. No one's saying anything. You could ask your students to make a choice. Okay, is this a circle or a square? And you can do this with harder content too. So as you get older, you can have them choose 2 things. And it can be really helpful for the students that maybe that language is just a little bit hard for them, but they can choose between the 2, and that'll really help them. All right, so that's some information about behavior you can do in every little thing. Let's talk about your classroom routines and how you can use those to help children improve their communication with you. So we're going to talk about language routines. And we all know, and you guys as future autism teachers and people who work with people with autism know, the routine is one of the most important things you can give a child with autism. Having a consistent everyday thing that you can go back to makes your classroom run smoother. They become more independent. It's just a good thing all around. And it's one of the most important things you can do as a teacher. It's also one of the hardest things to do as a teacher. Those wonderful classroom routines that you're going to build in your future classrooms one day, you want to pair those activities with similar words or the same words every single day. So in my own work, especially when I work with my students with autism, when I'm done with every single activity, I sing a goodbye song so they know that we're all done. And I always use the phrase, we are all done, at the very end of it. So I'll go through, I'll sing goodbye, everyone, goodbye, everyone, goodbye, everyone, it's time for us to go. And I'll say, we are all done. And I'll do it with the sign, I'll do it on their device, and I'll say that same word so it really gets in there, and they see that every time I finish an activity with them, and they really learn those words. I've seen teachers do a great job with using this with calendar time. So they'll say, every time they do their calendar, it's yesterday was, today is, tomorrow will be. And using those same words and those same activities every day is such a powerful way to learn those words. And some of the best learning I've seen comes from using those same words with those same routines every day. And I'm lucky I've seen some really good teachers who do that. So once you have those wonderful routines established, a really good way to improve that is, I'm going to change this right now. That should say hand. Mess up a part of your routine. So one thing that I'll do is when the kids are getting ready to go and I'm helping them put on their shoes for gym, I'll put it on their hand instead of their foot. I'll put a number on their calendar backwards. You can forget part of their lunch. And when you mess up that routine, that's a really good way to get them to start talking to you about something. No, the shoe doesn't go on my hand, it goes on my foot. That gets you a lot more language than just putting it on your foot and then going through your day. I saw a teacher do a really great job with this. She had a student who was learning those preposition words again, like the on and off and under. And she very cleverly, during a math activity, hid the students' number blocks around the room on different places. So they were looking for them and they couldn't find them. Oh no, where's our number blocks? And she found them and she put them like, oh, this one's on the table. And he would say, on the table. And they came back and they did their math activity. All those things are a great way. So set up a routine, get it really consistent. And then once you have your language routines, change a little small part of what you do. And then that'll help initiate some communication with you. All right, so now we're going to talk about environmental modification. So what I mean by this is how you change the physical space of your classroom to help get kids talking more with you. So let's talk about your overall classroom setup. You want to have separate areas of the room for different things. And this is true for little kids as well as older kids. So even if you don't have a play area, like in a preschool classroom, you're probably going to have an area of your classroom where they can relax, where they can do something they really like. You want to have a literacy area where they can read books, and you want an area that has more structured tasks. So this is our work spot. This is your desk. This is where you do all your stuff. When you have a play area, especially for little kids, you want lots of different kinds of toys. And you want lots of different copies of the same toy to get them to do the same activity. And this really gets kids talking with each other, and it gets them using some more pretend play together, which can be really fun and a really good way to get language out. One of the ASD classrooms I was in, they had a drum set. They had, every kid had like a drum that they could play with. And oh my God, it was so loud. But it was amazing to see how they communicated with each other and how they would talk about things. And these are all non-speaking children, so a lot of them didn't say words, but they would interact together. And one little boy started going 1, 2, 3, 4 with the drumsticks and getting words out and doing the same thing. So having several copies of the same toy was really helpful in that situation. It can also be nice to leave an activity partially set up. Because especially our young children with autism, a lot of them have trouble knowing how to use an object for pretend play, knowing how to use an object in the way it was supposed to be used. So having it partially set up is a good way to start building that pretend play and using language to do some things. So you can do this in a lot of different ways. I've left food in a kitchen area for young children. And then they learn like, oh, this goes there. And you can talk about that. Like, oh, I found an apple here in the kitchen. All those things together. For older kids, it's not going to look the same, obviously. You're not going to have maybe all a drum set, but you can have a similar craft activity set up for them to all play with. You can have similar things that they all really enjoy in the same area, and that can be really helpful. The next part, and this is a wonderful thing, is you want your reading area to have lots of different books. And I know we have an author in our classroom, so I don't really have to go on and on about how you need lots of different books, and particularly books that show a lot of different types of children. So you really want books that kids can see themselves in. So if you have Black students, you want books that have Black kids in them. If you have disabled students, it's really nice to have books that have disabled children in them. You want lots of different topics. As you know, especially our friends with autism, the things that they love will motivate them. I know we have some some people who work with fans of Thomas the Tank Engine. So if you have a kid that loves Thomas, having a book about Thomas is going to encourage them to touch that book and talk about the book with you, which is always a good thing. And it's always an important part of literacy. You also want your reading area kind of off to the side out of the main hustle and bustle of the classroom. As you can imagine, that classroom that had the drummers in it, it would be very hard to try to read a book in that drumming situation. So you want it a little bit quiet, a little bit private, so you can kind of focus and play with the books. And then you want books that kids can manipulate, play with, touch. It's especially important for our children that have physical disabilities to have different types of books that they can turn themselves. But all of our children, playing with a book, touching a book, interacting with a book is a really important first step to learning how to read, and being interested in the book. So all of those things will help really improve your literacy area too. All right, so let's talk about toys and materials. This is especially important for young kids, but again, older kids, it can be important to do some of these things too. So you want toys and materials in clear boxes at eye level, and it's really nice to have a label on a box so kids know what goes where, and you can kind of talk about that label. If you see this picture I have off the shelf, that's a great thing. You want a lot of your materials within reach so they can play with them, but it's nice to put some really high requesting items within sight but out of reach so kids will ask you for them. So for example, I had a little boy who was non-speaking. He loved this toy bean bin thing that I had. Or I'm sorry, no, it wasn't a bean bin. It was a letter puzzle that he would take the letters out and put in a bean bin. He had the bean bin in a clear box that he could reach to, but that letter puzzle was always up on the shelf. And even though he didn't often engage or try to get me to talk with him, he would lead me over to the shelf, and then we would help him find the words, and we'd use all those adult behaviors we talked about, right? I would pause, I would wait, I would get his AAC device, and I would say the word on there to get him to ask for the letter puzzle so he could do his thing of taking the letter puzzle out and then putting the letters in the bean bin. And then a really nice thing to do with toys is you want to rotate some of your toys out after a few weeks so they don't get stale. It helps kids talk about new things. Changing your environment just a little bit can encourage some language. If something's a little bit different, they're more likely to go up to you and be like, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, look at, there's apples here today. All those things are good. And then, because you guys are autism teachers, this is probably so important for you guys more than almost any other group, but it's very important for all kids, is you want visuals around your classroom that help kids learn about things. So putting labels up to show where materials go. I hope before me you've heard about a visual schedule, but that is pictures or words, depending on how good of a reader the child is, that tell you how to do certain things. So I know at McGrath, we have some McGrath people, we have a schedule of how to wash your hands, like turn on the water, what to do with your coat and backpack. Another great thing is to display family members or other people that the kids know around your classroom. that also gives them something to talk about because you're more likely to talk about people you care about. Like, even in my own home, I have pictures of people I like, and I'm sure a lot of you guys do. And I've wanted to talk to people about that. Like, oh, look at me. This is me and my auntie. This is me and so and so. And it develops conversation. And for little kids, the people in their family are just as important to them as for adults. So having pictures all around the room is a really good thing to encourage some communication with you too. It's really nice to have paper copies of communication devices all around your room. So if you forget it or you don't have it, your non-speaking kids can communicate with you there. And it's also really nice to have something called a choice board for different activities that you do around the classroom. So a choice board is just it's basically a piece of paper, and we'll talk about this more in our AAC class, so we'll get into it there. It's basically has a list of options for you to choose things for. So, for example, I had an ASD classroom that I worked with that had sensory time every day. So they would do different sensory things. They could pick, and they had a piece of paper that had a picture of a bean bin and pop tubes and slime and all that fun, messy stuff that kids love. And they would go over to the choice board, pick their card, and either hand it to the teacher or put it next to their own picture. And that helped them make choices throughout the day. And you can do this for tons of different things: songs, lunch foods, all that stuff. So these are all great visuals that you should include in your classroom. So let's get into it. We're going to do kind of a good classroom setup and a bad classroom setup here. So this is a preschool classroom, and this is wonderful. I love how they do that. You see their book area. It's kind of off to the side. It's out of the main way. It's sectioned off, and they have lots of different books. They have a section over here that says family photos with pictures of all the kids' families and pictures of familiar people. They have tons of different books. I can see the diverse faces on the books over there. They have a kitchen area. I see some labeled bins on the shelf. They're doing a great job with that. And they have labels for each area too. They see house area, book area, block area, so kids know where to go. I think the only thing I would add here is, especially if I had non-speaking children, I would have some more paper copies of like their core board or their AAC, but overall this classroom is doing a great job. This classroom kind of has everything all together. They have a lot of different distracting items to look at. They have some labels, but they're kind of hard to read because they're not in clear bins. Things are not at eye level. Things are very not sectioned off into different spots. So I would recommend that the teacher that has this classroom kind of changes the flow so they have more work area, reading area, playing area, instead of having everything all together, and having more visuals that are a little clearer and easier to see. All right, and that's it for this lecture. Here are the works that I cited and consulted when making this lecture for you guys. All right, I look forward to seeing how you use some of these techniques in your own rooms. Bye-bye.